Hello, I'm John Coleman from ApocatastasisInstitute, an institute for the humanities, an alternative college and high school here on New Milford, Connecticut, USA. The purpose of this live broadcast, thanks to your donations and recording, is to get in day number 255 of the project. This is Apocatastasis' innovative and integrative curricula teaching the humanities, first of all and foremost, to our enrolled students in our premium 3-year course of study. Also, using the same curricula in a modified and relaxed form for our open events participants and our seminar people every month. And then finally, to you, our dear supporters, and those of you who are interested in what is developing here in Connecticut. The project, this synchronized ordering of various readings, including H.G. Wells's Outline of History, the Durant's Story of Civilization, and appropriate literature, is something that will bring our school community together. And it is underway. Here we are, day 255 of a 365-day cursus. We begin this year on August 31st. That is when we're turning a new leaf and beginning year one of the project. So here we are tonight, though. Here we are tonight, and we're looking at discovering the Americas, really. Although we will set the groundwork for what becomes these United States in particular. We have a lot to get in here with. And so, without further ado, an announcement, a poem which is appropriate to our topic this evening. Tobacco is but an Indian weed. And then we'll get into H.G. Wells and get into the Treaty of Tordesillas and John Winthrop and City on a Hill and Plymouth Rock and tourist traps and all sorts of good things. So, in the future, if interest presents itself, if you make yourself vocal, I may be prevailed to do a more regular news show than I do presently with Dear Dr. James Fetzer, which I do about every other week. So long as you remember to write it down in the calendar and wake up on time and get back from the supermarket on time and whatnot. I do that a bi-monthly show with Dr. Fetzer. However, maybe sometime in the future, we'll maybe have a news segment in this daily broadcast. In any case, I certainly do keep up with current events, and how interesting to see the clip I'm about to show you. And don't worry, I'm going somewhere with this. There is a plug-in to Apocatastasis. So let's watch the clip and see what, in fact, we're looking at here. Okay, what the hell was that? That was Al Jawlani, the head of the CIA al-Nusra Front, although presently he is politely called President Ahmed al-Shara, playing hoops. And I thought that was a very interesting rebranding of a cutthroat piece of garbage that was ginned up in Langley, Virginia. It's amazing how you can go through, how do they say PR? How do they say with the PR? You need a PR makeover. So you have this hand chopper, this head chopper that, with the great assistance of the Turks, takes over Syria with a ragamuffin bunch of drug addicts. and becomes the president of Syria. Seen the next day, the very next day in December, after HTS conquered Damascus, or rather, as the Turks conquered Damascus. Um, Seen the very next day with the Turkish defense minister, Ahmed Shara, so called, was. In any case, what the hell does any of this have to do with apocastasis? Well, I'm glad you asked that. So I showed the clip of Al Julani playing hoops because I thought, what a good on ramp to an invitation to read one of my articles. How do you like that? I actually did a whole poem on the war on terror last month entitled "The Waxies Dargle." And it was a lot of fun to write. I actually uh, compare and contrast Abu Musab al-Zarqawi, um, al-Julani, and Lily Phillips, who's a porno person. And you say, what can any of them have in common? Well, you can read the article, which I'm trying to wrestle onto the screen here. I trust that is what you're seeing here. You can freely access this from our staff publications page. This is the Waxies Dargle, Lily Phillips and some Muslim fellows on the way of all flesh. So I had a lot of fun with this poem. It's really largely a poem about the war on terror with a lot of fantasy and my thoughts on current events and world developments, not the least of which, indeed, was the immiseration and orphaning of Syria in December of 2024. So indeed, this is called the Waxies Dargle, and that is your announcement for this broadcast. Now, I'm going to clear some of these tabs here, and we're going to move into our poetry section. This is an integral part of the project. By the way, if you go on our website, we have a whole sub page under academics dedicated to this project. You can join us right now. You can download the text that we're using. You can download the page numbers to synchronize it to the day. The poetry cursus, the outline. Trying to close this tab. You can anyhow download all of that and join us indeed in our adventure, really. And part of that is this use of poetry. So we have a monthly outline of poetry, and basically day by day, 3 poems are reading from H.G. Wells, 3 poems are reading from the Durants, 3 poems literary reading. Now, that's not going to be realistic for most people. That's about at least a half an hour commitment, depending on your reading skills. It's probably more than most people can dedicate. But to commit to one of those units, or rakat, as I plagiarize the Arabic, those units, that's certainly doable, and it's ordered in a proper way. So the most important is the yearly H.G. Wells cycle, which is what we're broadcasting live. Anyway, you can download that all free. And you can join in this. I mean, part of Apocastasis's work is reaching out to people for ongoing education. That's why we do all of this broadcast stuff. So hop on and join us and download that stuff for free. Anyway, here is our poem. It's actually from the 18th century, I should think. We'll find out. Tobacco is but an Indian weed. Indeed, it's superficially about tobacco, but it's about a lot more than that, particularly the fact that we're going to die. This is a strange sermon and philosophical meditation wrapped up, if you'll forgive the pun, in tobacco leaves. So earlier today, I had a conversation with one of our collaborators at the Institute, Vandana Rataria, and she was mentioning when she teaches cursive handwriting, how she gets in secret hidden messages to the children about eating healthy and getting exercise. Well, this is a similar covert meditation on mortality. And this is set to music. In 2004, a band called the Virginia Company cut this song, and you can find it set to music. I'll just read it as a poem here. Tobacco's but an Indian weed, grows green in the morn, cut down at eve. It shows our decay, we are but clay. Think of this when you smoke tobacco. The pipe that is so lily white, wherein so many take delight, is broken with a touch. Man's life is such. Think of this when you smoke tobacco. The pipe that is so foul within, it shows man's soul is stained with sin. It doth require to be purified with fire. Think of this when you smoke tobacco. The dust that from the pipe doth fall, it shows we are nothing but dust at all. For we come from dust and return we must. Think of this when you smoke tobacco. The ashes that are left behind do serve to put us all in mind that unto dust return we must. Think of this when you smoke tobacco. The smoke that does so high ascend shows that man's life must have an end. The vapor is gone, man's life is done. Think of this when you smoke tobacco. So this is Tobacco is but an Indian weed from Thomas de Uffray, 1719, about 100 years into British colonization in North America, about 150 years into Spanish colonization of the same. So we see actually the mingling of I suppose the 18th century's two foci, which is religion and money. And if you can understand those two things, you can understand all you need to know about American culture. And so I suppose as we move to John Winthrop, we can have an extended meditation on the religious atmosphere of Europe in the 18th century. And well, I suppose to do that, just for reference, we can bring up the Treaty of Tordesillas, which H.G. Wells, who writes the outline of history, brings up earlier in our text. And this is actually referenced in our reading today. And I'm reading page 668 and 669 from this 1961 edition. There are many editions around there. Just find the section we're talking about. That's probably the easiest thing to do. Anyway, the Treaty of Tordesillas from 1494 was a treaty entered into by the papacy, the Spanish Empire, and the Portuguese Empire. And you can see how it delineates colonial possessions. The Portuguese are purple. The Spanish, appropriately, are yellow. And you can see that on different meridians, the treaty breaks things up. Well, as H.G. Wells points out, the treaty isn't quite a universal hit. After all, only the Catholic powers care about it, and even the Catholic powers, including France and the Holy Roman Empire, as I've alluded to several times this week and last, are not really that Catholic in terms of being under the jurisdiction of Rome after the Reformation. That's not the case. That is not the case, actually, as Orthodox Christians are fond of pointing out. France is basically an autocephalous church, which is interesting to think about, in fact. I won't develop that point, except to say that after the Reformation, whether you are officially Catholic or Protestant, you really want nothing at all to do with the papacy. It kind of cramps your style. And so the Treaty of Tordesillas is a great harbinger to the medieval idea of a universal Christian order where the Pope is basically the court of last resort and could avoid wars. The Pope's kind of like a medieval United Nations without John Rockefeller and population control, I suppose. Bill Gates is not hanging around the papacy in the 14th century, I should think. Anyway, it's the Reformation, and that whole dream is blown sky high. And as H.G. Wells points out, that whole vision of a united uh, Europe is really is gone, and therefore is a step backwards. Although in the West, perennially, there is this vision of uniting the world under a single order. And indeed, in the medieval Christian order, that wasn't quite such a foul thing. Even I had to scarf those words out just now. But in the medieval order, that was not seen as being at all opposed to the gospel. If there's one religion, it makes sense that there would be one state. I'm not arguing for that. I'm saying that this is a very old idea in Europe that perennially arises again and again. And in any case, you can see things didn't quite work out for the Spanish or the Portuguese. Um, Here we have Greenland up here. That ends up falling as Americans suddenly realized into the hands of was it the Swedes? I should know this, right? The Swedes or the Dutch? Recently, of course, President Trump in America has been making some moves towards Greenland, and it turns out Greenland, I think, is one of the Norse countries. Let's find out here. Anyway, that didn't work out. Africa completely being a Portuguese colony certainly did not work out. Denmark. So Greenland is an autonomous territory within uh, the Kingdom of Denmark. How do you like that? Well, it didn't end up in Portuguese hands either, and neither did much of anything else. Eastern Russia, for that matter. Australia. I'm afraid Australia never became Portuguese speaking, neither Spanish speaking. All right. So the point is, this is a harbinger of, or not a harbinger, but a call back to that medieval idea of the papacy as a court of last resort. That's dead and gone, and it's basically a scramble. Obviously, Spain takes much of South America as is envisioned. Portugal will take much more of its allotment in South America, giving us Brazil today. And then the Spanish really will only penetrate into North America, Florida, Louisiana, Texas, what we call these American states later on, and then all the way up the west coast of Central North America, if that isn't confusing. All the way up through California and things. So, but never really that inland. Although a lot of Spanish explorers did attempt to go inland. But the conquest is, it's a massive amount of territory with a very, very slight amount of a garrisoning force. And so you have, especially North America, you have other powers entering in. And of course, yapping on the heels of Spain is England under good Queen Bess. Now, of course, I'm taking a little bit of a step back, or indeed about a 200-year step back in time to make that reference. And of course, that's the difficulty of these outlines. You do have to bounce around a little bit, but you fall into the rhythm of things pretty soon. Pretty soon could be a few years into this series, but you get the gist of things. So yeah, England is on the heels of Spain, and indeed comes into possession of colonies in North America. I ought to pull up a good North American map. And none better than Google for this sort of thing. And so you have a lot of these Northern Europeans settling in North America. The French take Canada principally for furs, and you cannot disentangle the. Why is this not loading? Well, you cannot disentangle. I may just change the camera and just use the map in the book here. That's fine. This is Plymouth Rock, by the way, where some of those Northern Europeans settle. You cannot disentangle the history of what becomes these United States from those earlier themes of, yes, religion, and commerce. Right, people are coming over here for religious reasons and commercial reasons, and I do want to give us a good map here. And so what I'll do is I'll just change the camera. That will give me the excuse to get the um, camera squared away. And we see Dennis Bachman is approving. Uh, Thank you, Dennis. Thank you, sir. All right. So let me quit the screen share. Now, when it comes to those Northern Europeans, we really couldn't class the French as such, and they're up in Canada chasing the beavers around. But the Dutch and the English, especially, not so much the Germans. The Germans are still shattered politically and will be until the end of the 19th century. But yeah, the Dutch and the English, they are Protestants, and there is something worth laying out about that as I change the camera. And that is the Protestants don't believe the visible churches that they have, so-called churches, are divine. There is, of course, an ecclesiology and an understanding of the Church of Christ being a divine institution, but that is not extended in Reformed or, shall we say, authorized English Christianity, so-called Anglicanism. That is not extended to these denominations. If you're a Protestant, you do not believe that the Missouri Synod, for the Lutherans, is a divine institution, or the Baptist Convention is a divine institution. The closest you would get, of course, would be the Anglicans, but no one would seriously say that the Lambeth Conference is a divine institution. They're necessary if you're a Protestant for organizing and for mission work and getting things done and not having too many hands in the fire, too many, how do you say, chefs in the kitchen, whatever, irons in the fire. Can organize things. These denominations are good for organizing things, but they're not divine in the sense that a Catholic, an Orthodox, or East Syrian, so-called Nestorian Christian, not in the sense that the ancient Christianities understood the church and the visible church as being divine institutions. And so that leaves a vacuum in Protestant societies. And of course, the most Protestant society of all will become these United States, those colonies, and then after Federation, the United States that settle. I'll use this. I'll use my dip pen to point out. It's very sufficiently old-fashioned. That becomes the incipient United States, the most Protestant of all peoples. So much so that we say that John Calvin is the real founder of America. Not that he ever set foot here, but rather that his ideas have set foot here. And so not having a divine visible church has a few consequences in Protestant society. And we'll see how this fits into the subsequent development of American society. One of which is you don't, if you're a Protestant, have the sacrament of confession. And if you don't have that, you tend to have lots of guilt. And that becomes a motif in American culture and American Christianity, the ultimate meditation of which is the Scarlet Letter by Nathaniel Hawthorne. Right? What happens when you're penitent, but you have no way to do penance, so to speak? Well, if you're, a Reformed Christian living in New England up here, one of the ways that you can compensate for that mystery of whether you are chosen or forgiven by God is to be constantly looking for signs. And so the Puritans who are heavily influenced by Reformed theology, the Puritans who settle up here in New England are constantly looking for signs of divine favor. And this will develop by the 19th century into what we would call now the health and wealth gospel. This idea that if you are materially wealthy, if your crops are good, if your ship has come in quite literally, this is somehow a feature of divine approval. And then the other aspect of not having a visible church in America is that the state, and not just America, you can see the same thing happen in Europe, is that the state takes on that social role. And so you see subsequently to the Reformation, all of these early modern states getting involved until our day with moral topics which would be unthinkable prior to the Reformation in medieval Christendom. That was considered the purview of the church. And so, when you hear people say it's not the state's job to legislate morality, they are correct, but often those people will be correct for the wrong reasons. And that you do see in Protestant societies the state taking on a moral role which is more appropriate to the church. Now, whether or not that's good or bad is irrelevant to us as historians. What is that these are going to be definite phenomena when we see the development of these British colonies into the culture we call American. Again, to recap, that wealth will be a sign of your morality, and that the state will basically fill the role of the church morally and in other ways as well. Now, the other aspect alluded to earlier in tonight's class, in the song/poem "Tobacco is but an Indian weed," is that of commerce. And so commerce is a major mover of colonization as well. In a nutshell, the English colonists who settle in New England are religious radicals of some sympathy with Reformed theology. And then in what we used to call the mid-Atlantic states, so Delaware, New York, Pennsylvania, we see that those are settled by the Dutch, and so they develop a different culture altogether. Pennsylvania being settled by a Quaker family, and so Penn's Woods, the Penn family, and I believe the Delaware as well. I could probably include Maryland as part of the mid-Atlantic states. Now, that will fall into the hand of the English, especially New York, rather early, I think by the end of the 18th century. So New Amsterdam becomes New York. Right now we've allegedly renamed the Gulf of Mexico, the Gulf of America. There was another, yes, with Donald Trump's visit to the Near East, the Persian Gulf is going to be renamed the Arabian Gulf as a present to Mr. Sawzall himself, Mohammed bin Salman. The Gulf of the Persian Gulf will be the Gulf of Arabia now. So you say, okay, I guess name changes aren't new, are they now? So New Amsterdam becomes New York. But a different attitude altogether. And then the southern states are English, but there be much more of a commercial focus on them. Indigo and rice in Georgia, rice in Carolina. Eventually, by the early 19th century, of course, this will infamously switch over to King Cotton with the rise of the Industrial Revolution and the textile industry back in Europe. But early on, a lot of rice commercially. Up in New England, although we might assume the Puritans were very uptight people, maybe they were. Although a lot of that reputation comes from 19th century Unitarians like Hawthorne, in fact, who had a bone to pick with the religious establishment of the 19th century, not of the 17th. Anyway, New England, believe it or not, its commercial claim to fame was rum. They say maybe the Puritans weren't so uptight. Rum was the drink of New England, and indeed was the drink of America up until the American Revolution, when trade, obviously taking sugar from the Bahamas, the Caribbean, taking sugar and bringing it up to New England to be turned into rum, and then taking the rum and bringing it back to Europe. This is what we call the triangle trade. That's that was kind of the rhythm of things. You bring your slaves from Africa, drop them off in Brazil, the Caribbean, or even the southern North America, southern colonies. Then you'd en route here pick up your sugar, bring that up to New England to rum to Europe, and so forth, and different goods down to Africa, pick up your slaves and rinse and repeat. The point is, you have a major religious influence with the personality I described, and a commercial influence. Notice beyond the Alleghenies, here, America in 1750, helps if I have this on the camera. America in 1750, these are roughly the Allegheny Mountains. Beyond them are, well, let's take a looky here. The horizontal lines are the French, and then the cross-hatching are the Spanish. So we can see the French here are in the Mississippi Valley, all the way up into Canada, chasing those beavers. And then the Spanish, who once had such designs on North America, are really limited to what we call Mexico, Central America, and then up the west coast of North America. And that will always be steps back as we move along in history. In any case, let's read a little bit from H.G. Wells today and go from there. I just need to move the camera over some. There we go. So it was not only in America. Oh, hold on. I'm getting ahead of myself. That's for tomorrow. We're going to look at India tomorrow. So we're colonizing America and South America today. We'll get India in tomorrow. But here we go from H.G. Wells. We have given some account of the ascendancy of France in Europe, the swift decay of the sappy growth of Spanish power, and its separation from Austria. I mean, Spain is so overstretched at this point. It's not really that surprising how it loses power. It has so many balls in the air, and so many commitments in Italy, in the Low Countries, in the Holy Roman Empire. Here we see in Central Europe with Prussia. So, I mean, the Spanish conquest in the Americas is at least a secondary concern. Don't forget that you have the Ottomans still pressing in Europe. So that's the big threat. Anyway, so far as Portugal, Spain, France, Britain, and Holland were concerned, their competition for ascendancy in Europe was extended and complicated by a struggle for dominion overseas. The discovery of the huge continent of America, thinly inhabited, underdeveloped, and admirably adapted for European settlement and exploitation. The simultaneous discovery of great areas of unworked country south of the torrid equatorial regions of Africa that had hitherto limited European knowledge, and the gradual realization of vast island regions in the Eastern Sea as yet untouched by Western civilization, was a presentation of opportunity to mankind unprecedented in all history. It was as if the peoples of Europe had come into a splendid legacy. Their world had suddenly quadrupled. So just as things are looking very cramped after Constantinople falls in 1453, the day the world ended. Within a couple of generations, you have this quadrupling of available land, at least theoretically. There was more than enough for all. They had only to take these lands, the Europeans, and continue to do well by them. Good old-fashioned phrase. And their crowded property would vanish. Their crowded poverty would vanish like a dream. And they received this glorious legacy like ill-bred heirs. It meant no more to them than a fresh occasion for atrocious dispute. You could read what happens between Columbus and his ministers for these petty disputes. But what community of human beings has ever preferred creation to conspiracy? What nation in all our story has ever worked with another when, at any cost to itself, it can contrive to do that other an injury? The powers of Europe began by a frantic claiming of new realms. They went on exhausting conflicts. Spain, who claimed first and foremost, and who was for a time mistress of 2/3 of America, made no better use of her possession than to bleed herself nearly to death therein. We have told how the papacy, in its last assertion of world dominion, instead of maintaining a common duty of all Christendom to make a great common civilization in new lands, divided the American continent between Spain and Portugal. This naturally roused the hostility of the excluded nations. The seamen of England showed no respect for either claim and set themselves particularly against the Spanish. The Swedes turned their Protestantism to a similar account. The Hollanders, so soon as they had shaken off their Spanish masters, those are the wars in the Low Countries. It's something that really, maybe more than overextension, does the Spanish in, is the commitment to the Low Countries and the endless insurgency there. Anyway, the Hollanders also set their sails westward to flout the Pope and share in the good things of the New World. His Most Catholic Majesty of France hesitated as little as any Protestant. All these powers were soon busy staking out claims in North America and the West Indies. We'll boogie woogie ahead a little bit. The state of affairs in North America in 1750, this is just a generation before the American Revolution, is indicated very clearly by a map we have adapted from one in Robinson's Medieval and Modern Times. The British power was established along the east coast from Savannah to the St. Lawrence River. The Newfoundland and considerable northern areas, the Hudson Bay Company. There we go with the commerce again, right? I mean, who is starting these colonies? It's the Hudson Bay Company. It's the East India Company. You can't get away from that. Yes, the New England states, those are religious plantations. Yes, there's a commercial aspect to that. But Virginia is a commercial enterprise, and it's a private commercial enterprise. And so when you wonder why there's this strange work culture which develops in American life, you can't escape it from this reality. And frankly, when you wonder why there's such exploitation of labor in American history, whether that's the indentured servants or the slaves, the chattel slaves from various backgrounds, or the wage slaves of the 19th and 20th century, continuing to today, you can't get away from the fact that America 1.0 in these colonies are commercial, and they're very English commercial enterprises, meaning you grind down the labor for every last drop of wealth. You suck it dry. There are other types of capitalism, the German model, for instance, but In any case, uh, the British type of economics is brutal. Arguably because of the role of Jews in English capitalism in a way that it never turned German capitalism into such a brutal thing. There is that. I mean, I don't want to get out of our ken here, but after the Jews are kicked out of Spain, they run up to Holland and the Low Countries and England and become hugely influential in English speaking and Dutch capitalism. And frankly, it is that Jewish background which explains why English speaking capitalism is such a merciless thing. But we can revisit that in the future. The British occupied Barbados, nearly the oldest American possession, in 1605, and acquired Jamaica, the Bahamas, and British Honduras from the Spaniards. But France was pursuing a very dangerous and alarming game, a game even more dangerous and alarming on the map than in reality. She had made real settlements in Quebec and Montreal to the north and at New Orleans in the south, right at the top of the Mississippi, St. Lawrence River, and at the bottom. And her explorers and agents had pushed south and north, making treaties with the American Indians in the Great Plains and setting up claims without setting up towns right across the continent behind the British. That's over the Alleghenies, right? Allegheny Mountains. But the realities of the case were not adequately represented in this way. The British colonies were very solidly being settled by a good class of people. They already numbered a population of over 1 million. The French at that time hardly counted a tenth of that. They had a number of brilliant travelers and missionaries at work, but no substance of population behind them. Right? So you have this huge claim of land that the French have here in the Mississippi Valley, but it has only a tenth of the amount of people that you see in the British colonies. And so that's a huge pressure. And you can see that right after the American Revolution, where there's this huge migration over the Alleghenies, especially into what was called Ohio territory. And that's because, again, the predominantly agricultural area here. Well, it is the 18th century. You need more land to move into. And so, hence the interest in Ohio, which is a much bigger territory than the present state of Ohio. In fact, just as a legacy of that, here in New Milford, Connecticut, a lot of our founding families for whom have many streets and parts of town named after them, Lillis and Boardman being the two most prominent. If you go to Ohio, little piece of trivia here, if you go to Ohio on the same meridian as Connecticut out in Ohio, you will actually find Hartford, Ohio, New Milford, Ohio, Danbury, Ohio, Boardman, Ohio, Litchfield, Ohio. And the reason is because the settlers from Connecticut, in this instance, were able to move west. And Connecticut, just like other East Coast states after the Revolution, and after that invasion and that purchase of French territory, occurs. I mean, there's the whole French and Indian War, which explains also the shakeup. After the American Revolution, a lot of the states on the East Coast actually held territory that was their own proper land. So Connecticut actually owned, as part of the state of Connecticut, parts of modern Ohio. And even though it was not contiguous, it still legally was part of Connecticut, this ribbon of territory much farther west. So very, very interesting. So much to say about America. And we didn't even get to Plymouth Rock. How do you like that? We're going to have to at least take a quick look at Plymouth Rock. which I've been at this rock, whether or not it is the Rock of the Pilgrims, I have my doubts, but the Chamber of Commerce assures me that it is legit. And it's actually right there in the center of town there, and Plymouth, Plymouth, Massachusetts. And I've been actually here twice in junior high, in a very magical school trip we took to this place, and not just the Rock, but Plymouth Plantation and so forth. Very memorable. And then also in college, we took also a memorable trip here, memorable for other reasons altogether, but both excursions were quite pleasant. And indeed, the Chamber of Commerce swears that this is the rock that Winthrop disembarked from. We didn't even really get into John Winthrop, the governor, multiple time governor of the Massachusetts Bay Colony, but a fascinating figure. Certainly had an English face on him, that's for certain. And one who does lead the Massachusetts Bay Colony through those heady early years where they lose so many settlers, and is able to give them that moral courage and able to organize that plantation there and that settlement. Indians notwithstanding, I'm afraid. Anyway, this is just an introductory look at the settlement of North America, and so we have done so. And thank you for your attention and your patronage of Apocatastasis. This has been a lot of fun, this class. I really like American history and look forward in this study to revisiting this with our man H.G. Wells. Again, just a final recap. You can participate in these daily courses simply by going to our sub-site and freely downloading H.G. Wells's Outline of History, as well as our poetry cursus. There are going to be more resources as this curricula comes together, but this is a great way to bind all of the staff and students and alumni and supporters of the Institute in a common perpetual study. And then also an invitation, now that Ahmed al-Shara, so-called president of Syria, is sinking hoops and has rebranded his image. What a great opportunity to read my meditation on the fall of Syria and a lot of other things called the Waxy's Dargle. And you can access that by going to the staff publications page on the Institute's site, ticking below. Anyway, thank you so much. Hope you learned something, and I'll catch you tomorrow. Valete omnes, valete et habete, nocte bone.